Podcasting from Portland East to Portland West, from Big Pine Key to Pacific Beach, and from San Juan to Guam, this is All Across America. Cary, welcome to All Across America.
Good to be here.
Well, hey, it's great to have you on the show, and we're here today to talk about busking and about your new book on busking, and I think a lot of people know of the concept but may not know that it's got a name. So what is busking?
What is busking? That's an excellent question. And I did not know what busking was for years after I saw my first street singer, which I'd like to talk a little about at the onset. But buskers are street singers, are buskers. It comes from a Latin word, buscare, meaning to conquer. And that's what buskers do every day when they go to the subways or the sidewalks or the streets or the parks or the schoolyards or wherever they happen to set up.
And so who is the first street singer you ever saw?
Well, I grew up in Chicago. I'm from the suburbs. I lived kind of a sheltered existence, but my father came from an actual kind of poor background in the inner city in Chicago. His parents were immigrants from Eastern Europe, and they used to shop at a place called Maxwell Street. I always heard about Maxwell Street when I was a kid. But when I was about 16 years old, my father said he wanted to take me there. So we went to Maxwell Street. What he hadn't realized is that the neighborhood had changed from the 20s and 30s when he was a kid to the late 40s, 50s, 60s, and now 70s. By the time I saw it, it had become a black neighborhood. And accordingly, starting in the late 40s, a lot of blues legends used to play there. You could, long before my time, but you could see Muddy Waters, Chuck Berry, Bo Diddley, many artists of that generation playing on Maxwell Street. So by the time I went there, it was about maybe 1972. I was about 16 years old, and my father had no idea what he was getting himself into here. But we parked our car at the University of Illinois across the street, and I could hear slide guitar. Not just slide guitar, but I could tell it was a metal guitar, metal on metal. I just heard that clanging, and I could hear it from across a very busy street, Roosevelt Road and Halsted Street in Chicago. And there was a guy named Blind Arvella Gray. Arvella Gray was was born in 1906 in Somerville, Texas. He was blinded in a gun battle over a woman, the legend goes, in Peoria, Illinois, and found a way to get to Chicago, just a little bit north, where he lived on the south side, and we would play Maxwell Street every Sunday. We would play the Yell station at 63rd and Englewood on Saturdays, and I think he'd play Grandin State downtown on Fridays. So he had a whole routine, and he was, he was blind. He had a tin cup, not a tin cup, but like a Dixie cup, pinned to his lapel. And that was the first I ever saw of a street singer. But that wasn't all. We stayed, and I got his phone number, and I decided that day I was going to become a journalist. I ended up calling him, but before we were done with Maxwell Street, we walked around, and there was his sister. Who knew he had a sister named Granny, who was playing a couple blocks down, and a guy named Little Pat Rushing, who was plugged into a tenement. There were a lot of vacant lots, but a couple remaining tenements, and he was plugged into one of them, playing like electric Chicago blues. Around the corner was Blind Jim Brewer, who was a blues and gospel singer, but on Sundays his wife did the singing, and he'd play his these gospel licks on electric guitar. It was fascinating. I wanted to stay for hours. My father was like, "Can we go now?" I don't think so. No, I need to see more of this. And I went every Sunday I possibly could until I left Chicago in 1984. Well, I went to college a little outside of Chicago, so I lost track of that. Somewhere along the way, I discovered a secondary place to hear outside street blues in Chicago. It was called the Delta Fish Market. It was a relic from Mississippi. They had catfish, deep fried catfish on Saturdays, and you could see they had a bandstand outside, and they had a whole scene there too. So Chicago, not only had these blues singers at Maxwell Street and the Delta Fish Market. I probably should have gotten more into the Delta Fish Market in my book, but in addition, long before my time, long before, there was doo-wop on the street corners, doo-wop street street singing groups in the Jackson Park area of the South Side, which is where my mom grew up, but she has no memory of seeing that. Nor did my father ever have memory of seeing blues. It was kind of me who discovered it as it was, about to end. Maxwell Street was eventually torn down, and pardon me, as I mentioned, it was near the University of Illinois, so it became, and right near the Loop too. So it became expensive downtown real estate, very gentrified, and that's what you have now. And there's been an attempt to have a Maxwell Street across the freeway, not really on Maxwell Street, but it's not the same. They do have street music, but I mean, the legendary Maxwell Street will never again be. But that was the first street music I saw. I went to Northern Illinois University. I studied journalism, and I started writing a lot for rock magazines and fanzines and such, blues magazines. And when I got out of school, I was writing for a punk new wave magazine called Trouser Press out of New York. And one day,
Yes.
the editor of Trouser Press, pardon me, called me and asked, is Milwaukee anywhere near Chicago? I said, yeah, why? He said, well, I told him I could probably be there in about 90 minutes. What did he want? And he said there was a band called the Violent Femmes who had just signed to a label called Slash Records, a punk new wave label in Los Angeles. But they were a folk band. Well, they were a punk band, but they played on acoustic instruments, kind of folk punk. And by the way, they're buskers, street singers. I'm like, okay, I'll go there. So we met on the streets of downtown Milwaukee, and they were no longer street singers by then, but they actually gave me a little bit of a demonstration and played their instruments and showed me where they played. And they were actually discovered by the Pretenders, first by James Honeyman Scott and then by Chrissie Hynde, busking in front of a Pretenders gig. And the Pretenders actually asked them in to be the opening act for their real opening act. And so people in Milwaukee who had kind of scorned seeing these guys playing the street were like, wow, here are those guys from the street playing this theater. So that was part of that was the second of my trifecta of busking revelations. In
Wow.
1984, I got a job. I got an offer to work for a record company in Los Angeles, IRS Records, and I couldn't say no. This was the label that had REM, the Go-Go's, the Alarm, the Fleshtones, the DBs, Concrete Blonde, Fine Young Cannibals, English Beat. There was no way I could say no. I was 28 and I was single, and fortunately, I had a cool landlord who let me out of my lease, and I was there in 2 weeks. They were good enough to put my most of my belongings and my car on a truck to LA while I jumped an airplane about 2 weeks
Wow.
later with two suitcases, and now I live in LA. So I did what every new person in LA does, and a lot of people who have lived there for years. I walked down Venice Boardwalk, which is a very famous stretch of California beach, and thinking that I would see a lot of girls in bikinis, and I certainly did. Um, I was astounded when I suddenly heard a soul singer who sounded like Otis Redding. And I look around and there's this old black man with an acoustic guitar and a white beard, white hair and a white beard. And he was, singing really soulfully. And I didn't know who he was, but I stuck around and found out that his name was Ted Hawkins. And I kept walking down Venice Boardwalk, and there was a guy dressed as a Sikh, in a Sikh outfit and a turban, with roller skates and knee pads, playing an electric guitar through a pig nose, battery operated pig nose amp on roller skates. And his name was Harry Perry. And I'm like, wow, the street music out here too. It may not be blues, but it's kind of soul, and on Venice Boardwalk where I least expected it. So those were really the three kind of buskers. Well, four if you count Harry Perry and Ted Hawkins as separate entities. But so I had seen busking now on the south side of Chicago, in Milwaukee, where I least expected to, and now on Venice Beach. And in addition, I had traveled to New Orleans and I'd seen street singers, in what is it, Jackson Square and
Yes.
Royal Street. So I'd seen my share of that. I'd been to South by Southwest in Austin in the very early years where people who couldn't get official showcases, played on the streets, played on East 6th Street. Mary Lou Lord, who's in my book, a very credible indie rock artist from Boston, playing on the streets of Austin because she couldn't get a gig, joined by Billy Bragg, who himself was a busker. So anyway, I lived in LA. I worked for 6 record companies as head of publicity, including Capitol Records. It was a very good run, and I decided to step out of the PR realm just 2 years ago, 2 or 3 years ago. In fact, it was 3 years ago this week. Um, and my wife suggested that we move to the desert, where we had always enjoyed vacationing out by Palm Springs and Joshua Tree. So it was a bit of a change. And I decided in my retirement, I wanted to write books. So 38 chapters. I could have gone on for 100 chapters. I could have gone on for 200 chapters on famous buskers. There are all kinds of people I would have liked to have gotten in the book. And there are a few that I tried to get in the book and was turned down for interviews with. But, being a bit of a savvy, publicist and journalist, I know how to ask for these things. And I was surprised by the amount of people who accepted and were excited to talk to me. Of course, there were a lot of dead people and who were buskers too, so I had to do secondary research on them. I interviewed a lot of eyewitnesses. There were a lot of places, either genres or places that deserve more than one chapter. Maxwell Street got 2 chapters, one on Blind Arvella Gray and one on the rest of Maxwell Street. New Orleans got 3 chapters. I started early on with Louis Armstrong and Kid Ory. Kid Ory was a very early 20th century cornet player. And who would have thought that I know his daughter, that his daughter's alive and well and not that
Wow.
old.
Really? I
Uh,
mean, he was active in the 1920s, Kid Ory.
right, but he has a daughter who was a famous chef, not a famous chef, but a very respected chef in Los Angeles, who
Wow.
I've met in my social circle while in LA. So
Wow.
he was my eyewitness for him. And I bought some books. A Moondog, unfortunately, a jazz and classical uh, artist who used to busk somehow in Midtown Manhattan. Uh, was deceased, so I had to do a little bit of research. I read a biography of him and quoted that and talked to some other eyewitnesses, found some people who had seen him. I had actually met him once in Chicago, but was a little bit shy about seeing this guy in a Viking outfit with with a pitchfork standing out in front of the Jazz Record Mart. I didn't know what to say to him at age 15, but we'd actually met. And for better or worse, I got one of the final interviews with Mojo Nixon, who I've known for years and we're old friends, but I had no idea that he was a busker, not in San Diego where he made his name, but in London on the Tube. He had gone out there to join the Clash after college, and I don't know if he was serious or not. I don't know if the Clash was hiring any extra players, but that's what he went out there for, and became a busker out on the streets of, rather the subways of London, the Tube. I talked to a lot of American artists who busked in Europe. So I have a section on Europe. I have a section on the Midwest, a section on the South. I talked to a few people who had busked in Austin, which is the live music capital of the world. What's the band? Oh gosh, Poy Dog Pondering. And I also talked to Lucinda Williams, who's a former neighbor of mine in LA. She lives in Nashville now and
Oh,
lives
wow.
in the
Yeah.
desert now, but she was very happy to be a part of this book.
That's great. I mean,
Uh,
do you feel like people who were buskers and made it, and there's quite a few, I mean, some of which, as you described with the Violent Femmes that were discovered on the street. I mean, do you feel like it makes them more versatile musicians when they do make it big and that they've had to deal with so much? I mean, you're in the middle of the street, literally.
Absolutely. Well, many of them told me that it really taught them how to emote. And in particular,
Yeah.
Billy Bragg told me that he foregoes sound checks. I mean, he'll take one if he can get one, but if he can't get a sound check, no problem. He'll just come up to speed before the audience. It's no big thing. So I think it taught a lot of people how to really emote to people, and some people not caring. Elvis Costello busked only once that we know of,
Yeah.
but he had not been signed to American CBS. I guess CBS distributed Stiff Records that he was signed to, but American CBS had not signed Elvis Costello. So when they had their convention, including a lot of the American personnel, he busked in front of the convention, and he actually got arrested. So instead of watching the detectives, he was watching for detectives, and he got arrested. But it actually, caused got him some attention out there, and he
Oh, definitely.
got signed to the American Columbia Records for a pretty good run. So I talked to lots of people who started out as buskers long before they were
Yeah.
anything else. Madeline Peyroux was a jazz singer from New York who had a kind of hippie bohemian mother who took her to Europe as she was growing up, and basically told her, you've got a guitar, go out there, sink or swim. And she would play in front of the cafes of Paris or in Cannes. In fact, she met an associate of Bob Dylan, whose name escapes me now, but it's in the book, who is pretty famous for busking, and kind of took her along as kind of a sidekick. So that's how she got her start. Now she's a very famous kind of folk jazz
Nice.
singer, you could call her, because she still has that kind of busker acoustic guitar thing in her. So
Right. Right.
but I got turned down. I never heard back from Tracy Chapman, and I actually was given her PO box in San Francisco, and sent her a letter, put a stamp on it, put it in a mailbox, didn't hear back. And then there were others in that category that I wasn't able to get. So in some cases, I either left them out or I went to secondary sources. You can find a lot of articles. Of course, anytime I took material from an article or book, meticulously footnoted and bibliographied, and that was a new experience for me. But fortunately, 38 chapters and 100 people spoke to me, and not just musicians either. I spoke to a busking advocate attorney in New Orleans, and somebody who runs an organization that's very busker friendly in New Orleans. Uh, I spoke to a guy who runs an organization called Playing for Change, which is a benefit organization, a nonprofit that actually does very well and has buskers sometimes playing the same song worldwide, connected by video. They've got a video.
Nice. I listened to a little bit of it. They did Bob Marley's "One Love." They did
Yeah.
"Stand by
Well,
Me."
Stand By Me is the famous one that
Yeah.
buskers are singing in Africa and America and Europe and all over the world all at once. So I spoke to him. I found that out in the desert there was a guy who was going to start a busking label and try to make that into a TV series, but that fell apart during the pandemic. But we had a
Yeah.
nice lunch, as long as he lives out here, and he's in the book as well. So I could easily write a volume two. My publisher says that volume two will not have the bang of volume one, and it would lose
Well, it never
some,
does. Yeah.
some of the personalization. My first chapter is in first person, and I would lose that certainly, I think, for a volume two. But I could certainly do an expanded edition. But I'm working on another book on another topic that I won't get into now. But so busking became it's one of my passions. In fact, this Sunday, I don't know when this will run, but we're talking in March of 2025, and on March 30th is Buscade. I actually approached a friend of mine who was a major concert promoter in LA. I mean, I've done publicity, and I certainly know my share of musicians. I no longer live in LA, but she is not only an experienced veteran concert promoter there, and knows how to actually put bands on stage, but actually owns a bookstore next to a concert venue. So we've got that entire block, the 1800 block of Sunset Boulevard, not cordoned off because we don't have any permits, but it's legal. And we will be
Yeah.
featuring buskers, some of whom are coming out from Boston and Portland, I should mention, at
Wow.
this thing. So I hope we don't get busted for doing it, but busking is legal, and we just won't block the
Yeah.
sidewalks.
There you go. You talked about permits a lot in the book, and in some cities require permits, some cities don't. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I don't know, city for city what the permits are, but certainly in New Orleans, it's legal on Royal Street and Jackson Square and various other
Nice.
points. But you're not allowed to block traffic or block sidewalks, which is something we'll have to be careful of on Buscade. Um, and in Chicago, it used to be illegal. A woman who has since passed on, named Destiny Quibble, was her stage name. was an activist and actually helped get it permitted. And LA, Harry Perry, the guy on Venice Boardwalk on roller skates and the turban was very instrumental in getting it legalized first in Venice and then throughout LA. And it's a big thing in the Third Street Promenade now, which is city of Santa Monica, which is a
Okay.
suburb of LA. But nonetheless, they love live music there because face it, you can buy anything you want on Amazon. I can have anything. I can order tonight and have it delivered to my door tomorrow. So that has put a lot of downtown sections out of business. And even Third Street Promenade, which used to be a lively place where you'd go to the Gap
I
or
know it.
go to
I know
Starbucks
it.
or you go to the movies or you go to a restaurant. I read, although I don't live in LA proper anymore, that Third Street Promenade has become a ghost town. And what busking does is give people a reason to go out into the downtown
Yeah.
sections.
Yeah. Yeah, and you're right how it contributes to just a vibrant downtown area, and I mean you
Exactly.
see that. I mean Venice, of course, Austin, Sixth Street. I'm trying to think of other places in the country. Boston Commons, I think, is a great spot for busking.
Lower
Um,
Broadway in Nashville, Lower
yes,
Broadway in Nashville, Beale Street in Memphis, perhaps. I'm not quite as familiar with the East Coast, but I'm sure obviously, I did a chapter in the book on, oh, what was it? Washington Square, very famous.
yes, New York City, Washington
Uh,
Square Park, still
uh,
to this day is a famous busking
I
location,
spoke
which
to
is
93-year-old Ramblin' Jack Elliott about busking in Washington Square. I spoke to somebody who had produced a lot of artists who came out of that area, signed them to various labels like Elektra. And then I spoke to a latter-day talent scout for Elektra Records named Danny Fields, who's mostly famous for having managed Ramones and the MC5. But he was walking to work one day to Elektra Records, where he was a publicist and did a little bit of A&R. And he's
yeah.
walking through Washington Square and sees a guy singing about marijuana, like very loudly, have a marijuana. Of course, it was illegal back then. I mean, I can go to the pot dispensary in Palm Springs right now and show my ID and buy edibles it's illegal out here. But back then it was very, very contraband and very, very illegal. And David Peel was the name of the singer. And Danny Fields, the talent scout, goes to his boss, Jack Holtzman, who runs Elektra Records, and says, I saw this guy singing in Washington Square about marijuana, and it could be a really controversial album, and I love controversy, and can we do this? And Jack Holtzman agreed. So they actually recorded him out in Washington Square, and to make it really busking, how did they get the electricity to record? They actually tapped into a street lamp. You can kind of
Classic.
through the base of
The
it,
base,
and
yes.
I guess, and they managed to get their recording equipment working. And that wasn't the only instance of Elektra Records signing a street singer. In fact, this leads me to two stories. I spoke to a producer from Elektra Records who happened to see a street singer whose name, it turns out, was Oliver Smith, a white guy, blind, with a little dog, and he was playing the streets of Manhattan. And this producer, and I'm forgetting which of the producers this was, went to his boss, Jack Holtzman of Elektra Records, the founder, still with us by the way, and asked Jack if he could, record this guy, Oliver Smith. So that afternoon, they went into the studio and recorded an album. And lo and behold, it didn't sell much, but it got nominated for a Grammy in the very
Wow.
obscure, then obscure category of folk music. I mean, the Grammys in the old days, pop, rock, country, soul, maybe jazz, classical. Folk was kind of an also ran. And
Yeah.
uh, so this guy was one of the nominees in the folk category, but that doesn't stop there. And by the way, that guy was never seen again in New York by this producer after the recording of this album. He kind of faded into obscurity, despite
Yeah, I never heard of him. I listened to it
Oliver Smith.
just today. Yeah,
Yeah.
never heard of him.
Oliver Smith was up against a Nashville street singer who played in downtown Nashville by the F.W. Woolworths, which I mentioned because the F.W. Woolworths in downtown Nashville is still around. First of all, might be the only
Really?
Woolworth still standing, and has
Yeah.
some significance as a civil rights outpost. There were a lot of demonstrations held in and around it. So there was a singer, and this reminds me of my story. There was a singer named Cortelia Clark, who was a blind blues singer from Chicago, but he found his way down to Nashville, was playing in front of F.W. Woolworth's, and there was a little boy, or maybe a teenager named Michael Wiesner, who was taken shopping by his mother, much like I was taken to Maxwell Street by my father. And he was very transfixed with this blind blues street singer, Cortelia Clark. And when Michael Wiesner grew up and became a producer for RCA Records and other labels, he asked his boss, or he asked the A&R head of RCA Nashville, which of course is a country label, Chet Atkins, maybe Elvis Presley, Dolly Parton, Porter Wagner. That's what RCA was known for on Music Row in Nashville. He asked if he could record this guy, Cortelia Clark, the street singer, and the answer was yes. So they went out to the I think it was Fifth Street then, and it's now called Representative John Lewis Way in downtown Nashville, and recorded the street singer Cortelia Clark on the streets. And lo and behold,
Wow.
this album too became a nominee in the folk category of the Grammys in 1967. And there were a couple of bona fide folk artists in that category. The Kingston Trio, I think, maybe Judy Collins. I forget who else, but a few real bona fide folk artists. But never underestimate the power of block voting on the Grammys. Michael Wiesner worked Music Row. He asked all of his friends at RCA Records, who were all voting members of the Academy, and all of his other friends, please, I know you probably wouldn't vote in the folk category. We're a country label down here, but if you can vote in the folk, and if you can vote for this RCA album by Cortelia Clark, that would be great. And Cortelia was, unfortunately, according to Michael, who I've since met the last time I was in Nashville, he was too ill to attend the Grammys himself, and he didn't live much longer, but he won the Grammys against Oliver Smith, the other street singer, the other blind street singer, and against some real folk artists. So, now the folk category is, singer-songwriters and, kind of an annex of pop and an annex of country and Americana. And it's a very prestigious category. But back then, if you got enough people to vote, but it was still a surprise when, the Grammy went to Cortelia Clark. So that was a chapter. Obviously, Cortelia had passed on soon after the 1967 Grammy, but I interviewed Mike Wiesner, and in fact, I did a panel this past fall in Nashville at Americana Fest, kind of the South by Southwest of Americana, about busking, and we had a few buskers actually playing, albeit inside a hotel ballroom, but nevertheless. And Michael Wiesner telling a story about his mom taking him to Woolworth's.
Wow.
So, sometimes it's when you're least expecting it that you see these people.
Yeah. I mean, and it reminds me, there are quite a few blind buskers, or, Reverend Gary Davis, Blind Lemon Jefferson, Doc Watson, we're all buskers.
Right. And let's not forget too, Reverend Turley Brown, who is maybe best known for being on the cover of Wet Willie's album, Keep on Smiling. Wet Willie was a Southern rock group on Capricorn Records. Capricorn was based in Macon, Georgia. Wet Willie was from thereabouts. And when they recorded their album and they had a hit single, Keep on Smiling, at #1 in the early 70s, maybe mid 70s, they went all around Macon, Georgia with a photographer to try to find some colorful shots. And they found Reverend Turley Brown, and they gave him, according to Jimmy Hall from Wet Willie, who I interviewed for the book, they gave him what they thought was a fair amount of money for a blind guy, just to get his likeness photographed for the front cover. And so there was the front cover, and I remember that from when I was, buying, Southern rock records, and when Wet Willie was a thing. But it didn't stop there. Apparently, a lawyer, an attorney, went to Reverend Turley Brown and said, dude, this rock band, who have a hit record, Wet Willie, have your likeness on the front cover. Did they ever pay you? And he actually managed to get a higher settlement for use of his likeness on that album. So it was an interesting story. In fact, Lucinda Williams was not an army brat, but she was kind of an academic brat. Her father taught at whatever university is in Macon, and also in Austin, where she ended up doing her first busking, but she had seen
Yes.
Charlie Brown.
The
And
poet Miller Williams, and I think he
yeah,
became a tenured professor at University of Arkansas
very
in Little
good.
Rock. Yeah,
But yeah, the book actually starts with, right around the era chronologically. I mean, I go back to, I do a little bit of quoting of an earlier book on busking published in 1981 called The Buskers, who talked a lot about, early buskers. And, Benjamin Franklin was an orator and sometimes a musician. I mean, busking goes way, way back into ancient Greece and Rome. And, Shakespeare performed outdoors and all this stuff. My book actually begins around the time of Blind Lemon Jefferson playing in Dallas's Deep Ellum district.
yes.
And, I mentioned Louis Armstrong and Kid Ory playing in New Orleans. Reverend Gary Davis came along a little bit later, enough that he was still alive in the late 60s when there was a blues revival. But he too had played in Durham, North Carolina, and all over. And he made his way to Harlem. Harlem was a big busking outpost, as it turns out. They had their share of doo-wop groups. Um, and
A lot of foot traffic on 125th Street. I mean, that's one of the
yeah.
keys.
Well, on the cover of the book is a duo called Satan and Adam. And
Yes.
I've since come to know Adam, who is still alive and well. He's a slightly younger, well, I mean, he's younger than Satan, who was an older black man who was playing on the streets. And he's playing guitar on the streets. It turns out that Satan, whose name was Sterling Morrison, uh, had actually made a few records for Ray Charles's Tangerine Records. And then he ended up on the streets of Harlem or Bronx. And Adam was a student up there and played a little bit of harmonica, and very deferentially asked Satan if he could sit in and play harmonica. And they became a duo. He showed up again, and they became a bona fide duo. And I think my publisher, in seeing all the photos, when I presented all the photos, liked the idea that this was young and old, black and white. So, Adam was a younger, half Jewish guy from, I think, Connecticut, as a matter of fact, who had from New Haven, who was going to school on the streets and is nowadays a professor at Old University of Mississippi, Ole Miss,
Yes.
and an author of maybe 6 books, including a novel about busking and 1 or 2 books about it. So he was a very good source. He told me all about Satan and Adam. And in addition, there's a documentary that is definitely worth seeing. I think you can actually find it on YouTube, on the internet. And so that they became the cover boys of this of my project. Satan and Adam were together about maybe, God, I could be way off and I'm not looking, but I want to say about 6, 7 years. And they actually at some point Adam lost Satan. Satan went missing, and
Oh.
and investigating, it turns out that he had developed dementia and was now being taken care of by a relative from his native Florida. And Adam went to visit him, and but his mind was going. But music is a way of bringing people back to
Yeah.
memory. And they actually got him to the point where he remembered who Adam was. And they actually played with some difficulty, but nonetheless, and with the third player, they played a jazz fest in New Orleans, which
Oh
was
wow.
the last anybody had seen of Satan in public. And soon after he died, but Adam is still around, still plays his harmonica. Played at my Americana Fest with Pig Nose Amp, much like he played outside with Satan, and told some great stories about Satan and Adam. And that was going on in Bronx and Harlem. There was also the doo-wop scene, and I spoke to Jay Siegel of the Tokens, who has told me all about playing Rockaway Beach and various parts of New York. I spoke to Mike Stoller of the songwriting duo Lieber and Stoller, who told me that he probably himself hadn't seen any doo-wop groups playing on the streets, but he used to see them rehearsing in the men's room of the Brill Building, where he used to make records and he would write songs. First of all,
Famous.
he clarified that he
Famous.
did not write doo-wop. He wrote R&B. Of course, he
Yeah,
wrote
and the Brill building was a famous building in the 40s in West
in
40s
the
in
50s and the
Manhattan.
60s as well. It was a place, especially in the 50s and 60s, up till a lot of these people moved to Los Angeles in the mid 60s. But it
Yeah.
was where the music publishers would be, and record producers, and you're producing an album by a great singer, but the singer's got no songs. You go to the Brill Building and find the right songs. So
Yeah.
Mike Stoller was writing for Big Mama Thornton, ultimately for Elvis Presley, for the Coasters, and he told me some stories. So I felt like I was there in 1950s, early 60s, um, New York, New York. I'd
Yeah.
actually have been.
Speaking of New York, I mean, we can't forget the subway, and they've got the music under New York program. So anybody that rides the subway, I mean, they actually have auditions for buskers in New York City, which
I
is
didn't know
very
that.
cool. Yeah, and they get banners. So I guess it's to everybody's benefit because you're a captive audience in the subway, and the
Yeah,
last thing that you want is a really bad musician. So and of course, there's some folks that sneak through, but the better ones that are able to stake out the good
yeah.
spots are
Well,
are legit.
I've since become acquainted with a Boston singer who's actually coming out for Buscade, 3,000 miles to play for 15
Wow.
minutes in LA. That's how into busking she is. Named Ilana Katz. That's
Okay.
Katz, Katz.
Okay.
And she plays on the Boston subways, and she is
Great.
a violinist, blues fiddler, and singer. And
Yeah,
in addition to that, uh, paints articles of clothing and sells painted shoes and belts and clothing. As a whole cottage industry in the subways
that's
of
great.
Boston, and that's what she does for a living. And
That's great.
she would definitely be in a volume two if I do a volume two. And Mary Lou Lord is a busker from Boston who I believe still is in Boston, but she was one of the artists who could not get an official showcase at South by Southwest. So she
Yeah.
go to Austin, play on East Sixth Street. She was joined by Billy Bragg one night. Actually, passed her on his way to his official gig and said, "I'll be back," and actually came back at 2 a.m. then and joined in
Wow.
with her for another hour. And
Yeah.
she told me some great stories about busking. A guy who actually peed. Can I say that on a podcast? Actually,
Yes.
peed in her bizarre case. So I mean, all kinds of things like that.
Yeah.
And by the way, Mary Lou Lord is now a first generation busker. Her daughter too is a busker.
Oh, wow.
And her daughter taught her about QR codes,
Yes. Yes.
utilizing social media. So
Yeah.
for our Buscade, we will have a QR code, and that will be posted at
Yes.
all stations. And
Yeah. As people
when
don't
I
have change anymore like they used to, even paper
right,
money.
well, and people might give more money if they go
That's
by
true.
QR code.
That's right.
So
That's right.
people would give a quarter or a dollar. They give slightly more now that there are QR codes and
That's
PayPal.
right.
No,
Yeah. Their Apple Pay, they're more likely to give 5 or 10 than if they were just, scrounging for bills in their wallet. And thinking of the subways, I was thinking of the story on the DC subway, and I'm not sure if you came across this. This classical violinist by the name of Joshua Bell, it was an experiment
I know
through
who
the
he is.
Washington Post. And he went incognito on the subway during rush hour in DC,
Hmm.
and he played a Stradivarius violin. So we're talking a violin worth,
Hmm.
some millions of dollars. And he was recognized by only one person. He made $32.17.
That's funny.
So I mean, it's all about the imprimatur of the place that you're playing, and
Exactly.
for a musician who's one of the greatest of his generation in the classical world to just go unnoticed just shows how hard it is to make a living doing it.
Well, that reminds me of after I had finished the book and turned it in, I happened to see an old friend of mine, Grammy Award winning blues artist Bobby Rush. And Bobby Rush, at 93, has a very vital career, maybe more vital than it's ever been. And I hope he
Wow.
has many more years with us. But I told him about my busking book, and I told him about the fact that there was a chapter on Maxwell Street. I only wish I'd thought to ask him, to talk to him before I wrote the book or while I was
Right.
writing it. But he told me that he used to go to Maxwell Street and he would play the bars, the taverns of South Side of Chicago, which closed about 5 a.m. on weekends. And Maxwell Street would get going around dawn. So he would not even go home. He would go straight from the bar
Wow.
that closed at 5, straight to Maxwell Street. And one day, BB King came up to him and said, can I play with you?" And Bobby Rush had his band out there on Maxwell Street. And Bobby said, "Sure, we'd love you to, BB. We'd love you to play with us." And BB said, "But that'll cost you $50 right off the top." Well, it turns out that after a day of busking with the Bobby Rush band and BB King sitting in, they made $55. and 50 went to BB King, and the remaining 5 went to Bobby and his band.
Oh man, yeah.
Sometimes buskers just can't win.
Does require a lot of stamina to be a busker. I mean, they're out there for hours upon hours. I mean, you think of most bands going on stage for 90 minutes if you're lucky.
And there are good
But
days and bad days. It can
yeah,
rain,
yeah,
not in the subway, but certainly if you're on the streets, that's not a good thing when it suddenly rains, or, there are all kinds of things that happen that people told me. I asked just about everybody what was a good day and what was a bad day, and some had been arrested, and some made no money, and some had their perches, the places that they would set up, taken by other buskers, which is
right,
considered, there's no law against that, but it's really kind of considered taboo in the busking world. If you notice
yeah,
somebody sets up at oh, I don't know, Royal and Canal, you respect that. You don't set up at Royal and
yes,
Canal because that guy, whatever his name is always there. And I spoke to one couple, a married couple, oh, David and Rosalind from New Orleans, who I'd never heard of, but everybody told me you need to speak to David and Rosalind. So I did. And they used to get there at 3 a.m. to hold their space.
wow,
It's not like they were playing a bar the night before. They just got there at 3 a.m., sat around in pitch blackness until the sun came up, and they would have a choice corner to play on, when the tourists would show up, and the businessmen would show up, in New Orleans, walking down Royal Street. But it's considered. There's an organization in New Orleans that discourages that, and it's just very discouraged if somebody is known for being at a place, you don't take that place.
right, right. Um, And yeah, New Orleans is definitely the spot. Jackson Square. I've actually busked in Jackson Square.
Oh,
I
really?
played. I played. I mean, it was only for a couple songs that I. There was a woman. I mean, she was a girl. I mean, probably 18, 19. Had a fiddle, and I played the one fiddle song that I could play, "Shortening Bread." And I picked up her violin, and she was very scared. I think that I would somehow take off with her violin, and even more scared when I put it. I'm a lefty, so I played it like a lefty. She's like,
Mhm.
"This guy has
Right,
no idea what he's doing," but I did play shortening bread. And I mean, it was interesting how you mentioned that sometimes because the crowds kept passing by, some of these musicians would just play the same song over and over.
right. And that leads me to something that I've it's sort of in defining what buskers are and are not. So I live in the Palm Springs area, and I was delighted one day. It gets pretty hot here, and it takes a lot to be a busker. But I was delighted when one day I saw an old man playing "Lady of Spain" on an accordion. I thought, well, okay, I can call that busking. And one day I was coming out of a yoga class in the Palm Springs suburb of La Quinta, in a parking lot in a strip mall was a young man and a little dog and playing a violin. The man, not the dog, with his violin case open in the middle of a parking lot. I mean, in the middle of a strip mall parking lot. Like it was a good
Unlikely
thing
spot.
my car was just a little farther because I saw him and I took his photo, and you know uh, then I was asked to do a book festival in 29 Palms, which is up, the high desert in Joshua Tree. And I'd never been to 29 Palms or spent any time there, but they had a farmer's market on the first day of the book festival. So I spent a little bit of time in the farmer's market between things going on at the festival, and got a coffee, and there was a guy playing guitar. He would have been a busker, except that he was playing guitar by numbers pretty much. He had a backing track playing kind of smooth jazz,
Right.
with
Yes.
the drum machine and the bass parts, and he's just kind of playing by numbers. And I thought to myself, this is not busking. I do not consider, as the author of this book, I do not consider this guy a busker. Or somebody who plays. I saw a guy at a Tommy Bahamas store in Palm Desert, and same kind of thing, with the bass track and the.
Yep. Yep.
But I don't consider that busking. I consider busking not having a backing track per se, or if you
Yeah.
do, then maybe you did the backing, and it's your material. But
Right.
these were like kind of smooth jazz standards, and so I have my limits. I love outdoor music, but not everybody's a busker. But nonetheless,
And
it's good to see them out this way because we don't get a lot of them out this way.
that's right. And you talk about in the book about there's some controversy over amplification versus
Right.
not amplifying. Can you talk about that?
Well, in some cities, amplification is forbidden. And I don't know, from city to city, I kind of forget. I did a little bit of research on that, but and it all changes. Uh, but yeah, in certain places, amplification is just not permitted or is discouraged. For our busking festival, we will have pretty much buskers. No microphones. Um,
Wow.
we're going to try to abide by the law, and we just need to make sure that the sidewalks are clear, that there's a clear passage for safety. We don't know how many people we're going to have. It's going to be interesting.
Yeah, and they were talking about the amplification that it forces you when you don't have, I don't know, these one of these battery powered amps, that you really have to project your
Oh
voice, and
yeah.
it just makes you a better musician.
Well, all the musicians I spoke to, most of whom had become concert attractions, playing indoors on tour in venues, told me that busking had made them better performers. Billy
Yeah,
Bragg, Mary Lou Lord,
yeah,
Mojo Nixon, Madeline Peyroux, so many others, Tim Easton, Poi Dog Pondering. They all really took what they got on the streets and applied that to what they were later doing on tour. The Violent Femmes, obviously, as well.
yeah. Yep. Old Crow Medicine Show.
Old Crow
I
Medicine
mentioned.
Show in the book.
Yeah, I saw them on the streets of Boone, North Carolina, when I
Oh,
used
no kidding.
to live
Wow.
there. Yeah, yeah, and I was able to confirm it in the book because it was 1999, and that's when I was at Appalachian State. And I remember they lived in this decrepit old, hippie van, and
Yeah,
I would never think that all these years later they're playing the local concert venue, and the ticket prices are, a Broadway ticket, the equivalent. So they've really come a long way. And I mean, in
yeah,
that story, they were discovered part and part by Doc Watson, who also was
that's
a
right.
busker on the street of
That's
Boone,
right.
North Carolina, and had Merle Fest, which I believe still continues to this day,
That's right.
and which is really a great story.
And Rural Fest, it leads me to, it looks like we might be running out of time, but that reminds me that a lot of buskers nowadays, as a way of uh, maximizing their profit margin, follow tours and play out in front of tours.
Yes,
So Harry Perry, the Seek and roller skates that I mentioned from Venice Boardwalk, often goes to the concerts given by members of the Grateful Dead,
yes.
whatever they call themselves, post-dead. And I believe he gets a permit to do this, goes out and plays the parking lot, does a tailgate party, and makes a very good living doing that.
On the jam band circuit.
That's right, on the jam band circuit, exactly.
And on another topic, the movie Once. Can you talk about that?
Oh yeah, exactly. Well, that's one artist I wasn't able to get on the phone, so I used a lot of secondary sources. But certainly, that's another instance of me, encountering street singers. I saw that movie when it came out, and it had an effect on me. And I tried to get Glenn Hansard, but he had just become a father, I was told, and wasn't able to. I don't know whether I always believe this, but I was told that he wasn't available then and there. So I found a lot that was written about him and a lot of quotes. And he too is he remains a busker occasionally. He has a busking benefit that he does once a year on the streets of Ireland. So he's still out there doing it. But
That's great.
obviously, it once was about him, a busker from Ireland, meeting a busker from Czechoslovakia, and their love affair before, during, and after.
Great, great movie. Definitely recommend watching it and reading. The book is called Down on the Corner: Adventures in Busking and Street Music. Cary, how can people find out more about you and what's next?
Well, I have a website, carybaker.com. I am at work on a second book. It's a biography. That's all I want to say. It's a very different kind of a book. It's taking a much longer time. It's a biography of somebody who's still with us, though he's 80 some years old, with 9 lives to reflect upon. And
Okay,
trying to find him and all of his associates, those who haven't passed on, is what I'm doing currently. That, and writing a few articles, and of course doing this buscade this weekend in Los Angeles.
awesome. Well, Cary, it's great having you on the show.
Great to have you.